There's so many tears in my life today. So they're taking all of these kids and they're telling them that if you're different in this way from Hollywood model of little girl, then you must be a little boy. That's not right. That's not fair.
It hasn't always been easy to do, but at Rebel News, we've brought you the other side of the story, to the affirm all things trans or else narrative that's been normalized across the country. And in honor of Pride Month, I bring you an interview today with a detransitioner who blows that narrative out the window. Drea Humphrey here with Rebel News, and recently I brought you a report about an event called Vancouver Island Speaks. It was an event put on by author and podcaster Megan Murphy, and they were holding a discussion about gender ideology and its negative impacts on society. Now, while I was covering that story, I met Kellie-Lynn Pirie, a detransitioner who was identifying as a transgender man for 17 years before realizing that the lie she thought could help her wasn't the help she needed. Since then, she has founded an organization to give resources to detransitioners or people regretting transitioning. It's called Detrans Alliance Canada, and here is her story.
My name is Kenneth Kelly. I am a woman. I live with a mental health condition called gender dysphoria, which is why I have surgically and chemically altered my social gender presentation to appear more masculine, because that helps me to be more comfortable living in this world. So, when I was very young, less than 3 years old, Mom divorced my dad and remarried to a convicted pedophile. She had 6 kids, and his life revolved around his deviance. So I grew up very much under that influence. Gene started giving me drugs when I was really young, like 5 years old. My one cousin to this day talks about how he was blown away because I knew how to smoke dope already. And it was like, what 5-year-old knows how to smoke marijuana? And I could drink vodka straight from the bottle type of situation. So Gene really enjoyed watching other children, our children having sex. So he started bribing boys to have sex with me. And when he did that, he would have me smoke marijuana cigarette laced with ketamine. So I would completely disassociate. In this environment, I very much developed this notion that boys have it better than girls. And this would be a theme that would really build throughout the time that this pedophile was in my life, was that I would see boys not being molested. And when he did, one of his friends had 2 daughters, and that man was also a pedophile. I say that man was also a pedophile because of the things I saw him do to kids. He wasn't actually convicted, I don't believe. So us girls, they would actually like beat on us if we didn't do what they told us to do. So it's this underlying theme and a repetitive theme that boys are safe, boys are protected, boys don't get abused in the way that girls get abused. When I was about 12 years old, I had a pregnancy scare. I don't know how it ended. I missed my period for 3 months. How it terminated is kind of lost in a sea of drugs and alcohol. After that, he became absolutely obsessed with the idea that he could use me to have unlimited access to babies. And that just tore me up inside. So I developed a plan to somehow get him convicted. So he caught me one day recording him. I had a tape recorder in my bedroom and I was recording him. And he absolutely freaked. He knew that he had lost control of me. He started screaming, he started beating on me, and he wrapped his hands around my throat. And I blacked out. And I've run the time frame on this through my head so many times because it would have taken the police 5 to 10 minutes to get to my house from the time my neighbor called, because my brothers were too afraid to call. Um, and yet I'm alive today. Um, so I was downstairs in the living room. I was dressed. I was sitting between a social worker, the police officer. The one police officer was telling me that given the scene they walked into, he's arrested, he's in jail, you never have to see him again. Any further information you can give us will only serve to help us keep him in jail longer. Um, my mother initially resisted the process, and then my one aunt came down and was like, if you continue to resist, they're going to investigate you also. So mom eventually agreed to um, cooperate with the investigation. Especially in my early 20s, I knew that at least I had done everything I could to get him off of the street. And he did. He eventually pled guilty to sexually interfering with a minor in his care. After that, I became increasingly uncomfortable with being seen as pretty or as beautiful, and was very much aware of when, like out in public, when someone would see me as a beautiful woman or a beautiful young girl, and just wanting to hide. Like I was very much the baggy clothes, especially when I sobered up in my 30s. I wanted to disappear. I wanted to not be seen, to fade into the background. Without having that buffer, that alcohol provided in my life, I was really aware of my level of discomfort being a woman. And when I got sobered up, I was in women's drug and alcohol support recovery. And that was a really uncomfortable situation for me because I didn't know how to self-regulate my emotions, especially in early recovery. So when I started talking with my drug and alcohol counselor about the level of discomfort I was having, and I had met someone who was transitioning, that individual was like, oh, well, if you ask these questions, then obviously, if you're not a trans person, then you're not uncomfortable with being your birth sex, right? Like that was like the litmus test for, are you this way? So I was getting these messages that my discomfort with being around that many other women was about my not really being a woman, as opposed to just the level of trauma I was living with in my life. And that once I got onto the transition path, then it's all very much forward because there's all of these hoops. There's all of these goals to hop through. So there's get a carry letter from your doctor, get a referral for your testosterone, get a referral for your surgery. So it's when you're looking at the hoops, then I could concentrate on the hoops and not so much what was going on inside of me. And when I did express doubt, like I'm not sure if this process is really for me, then you get the talk about internalized transphobia. You're like, what's the differential diagnosis for internalized transphobia as opposed to the first signs of desistance, the first signs of regret, the first signs of going, this isn't the path for me. When the radical feminist, lesbian, separatist women's support recovery house I was volunteering at heard that I was considering transitioning, I was like completely kicked out of that space. I wasn't welcome back on the property even to pick up my personal belongings from when I did my volunteer shifts. It was like, never again. The executive director never spoke with me again to her dying day. So I was getting kicked out of one space, told I belonged in another space, trying to find. So it gets to be the people who were welcoming me saying, "You belong here," I just like clung to them desperately, wanting to have a group to be in. Um, and that kind of just took me through the whole transition thing. And it's always the idea that this next step, I will feel better. And when I got to the end of the whole process, I didn't feel better. I still had um, the discomfort going on. I still, and I realized I had made myself invisible to the people I was sexually attracted to. Um, at that time, this whole idea of the separation of sexual orientation from romantic orientation hadn't yet come about because we're talking 2010. So the whole gender bred person is, I think it was 2016, 2017 is when that whole ideology started coming out. And that's the ideology that separates your sexual orientation from your gender orientation, from your gender expression, from your romantic orientation, from your biological sex. Right? It fractures the person up into 5 different categories. And detransitioning it feels really lonely. I had 5 years where I didn't really talk to anyone about it. I had gone long haul trucking. So I was still working and being seen as a man, feeling very much isolated and alone. Transition regret is a lot higher than it's talked about. Had the hysterectomy, the next major hoop after that. So once that doctor did the hysterectomy for women, he would then require them to switch over to another provider to do the follow-up with the testosterone. So then I had to hop through another assessment hoop to get seen by a endocrinologist there in Vancouver. After that, the next hoop was the bilateral mastectomy. I got a private referral. It was the year following that surgery, I realized I was having complications from the hysterectomy. I was having a abscess process that had constantly fistulated into my intestinal tract. So it would flare up, there would be relief. It would flare up, it would be relief. And then it flared up and it wasn't draining into the intestinal tract again. So I ended up with emergency surgery, and that was a real wake-up moment of biology matters. That was kind of that process in. The process out was finding a doctor willing to prescribe the estrogen. That took years, and also getting back to a place of being ready to take it. There's so many tears in my life today. Sometimes I feel like I'm just constantly crying. I had a 2-month period where I was crying so much I still have a rash on my eyelids just from the salt from the tears because I was just constantly bawling. So many youth, especially now, are getting blindly, and it doesn't look at the underlying trauma. And eventually, there's going to be no more hoops. And eventually, the trauma is going to come forward. And eventually, the kid is they're going to crash. We know from the research that transition regret tends to peak at about 10 years. So the degree to which transition regret is being covered up it's cruel. And also, they're telling children now, especially like with the gender-bred person model, there's this idea that there's male, there's female, there's in between. So everyone on the gender-bred journey is somehow trans. So we're now telling people that being normal is somehow wrong. Their diversity is compliance, their inclusion is exclusive, and their equity equalizes downward. It's about taking all of these kids who are being different as a kid is a normal part of being a kid. So they're taking all of these kids and they're telling them that if you're different in this way from Hollywood model of little girl, then you must be a little boy. that's not right. That's not fair. So I want to speak that truth into their lives if I can, that it's okay to be different.
If you appreciate this report and want to see more like it, including radical gender ideology that is targeting children in schools, go to our special website called stopclassroomgrooming.com. There you can find many reports like this, but you can also chip in whatever you can to help support the costs involved to covering this important issue.